Gwadar is a strategically important point on the map of Pakistan. It sits very close to Iran, actually, on the very southern coast. It's about a 10-hour drive west of Karachi, but it's only about an hour drive to Iran. The area is extremely poor. It's very arid. It doesn't have enough water. Electricity has been very spotty. One of the most surprising things about visiting Gwadar is the high degree of security that is absolutely everywhere. There are armed guards that are required to escort foreign visitors everywhere you go because it is a contested region, because there have been militant attacks in the past.
Despite all this, Gwadar is a key part of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, also known as CPEC, the crown jewel of President Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative.
We will leave no stone unturned in ensuring that CPEC and all the projects under its umbrella are materialized in time and in full.
So far, just 1/3 of all CPEC projects have been completed. In Gwadar, none of them have been, and the promised improvements for local people like job creation and better infrastructure have not materialized. So, what has China got to gain from developing this seemingly obscure city on the Pakistani coast?
We have seen this movie before. An outside power comes into Pakistan. It spends heavily on big infrastructure projects. China's not the first to do it. Right after Pakistan became independent in the late 1940s, early 50s, the U.S. was sending advisors into Pakistan to help plan its economy. The U.S. was doing infrastructure projects there too.
Those early projects helped the US gain Pakistan as an ally against the Soviet Union during the Cold War. The US has provided about $80 billion in aid to Pakistan since its independence, but overall the result is disappointing. One of the recent attempts was in the late 2000s as part of the US effort to combat terrorism in Afghanistan.
The number one item on that aid package was to build these high visibility infrastructure projects. So there are literally projects that the United States tried to do, or Pakistan proposed to the United States in the 2000s during that period, that have become Belt and Road projects.
China is stepping into a gap which has been left by retreating ambition from the US.
为“一带一路”建设美好的未来，为各国发展繁荣干杯。
The Belt and Road Initiative is China's President Xi Jinping's signature foreign policy initiative. Launched in 2013, it comprises an overland belt stretching through China, Central Asia into Europe, and a maritime road stretching around Southeast Asia through the Indian Ocean and up past East Africa. So a benign way of characterizing China's Belt and Road Initiative would be infrastructure for influence.
So when Xi Jinping announced the Belt and Road Initiative, shortly afterwards China designated Pakistan as its showcase flagship project. So the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was going to be the biggest and most important showcase for the success of the Belt and Road. Pakistan is in great need of infrastructure development. They wanted to create a railway, a highway, roads, all kinds of economic development that is intended to help Pakistan. And it's meant to provide jobs, 2.3 million jobs for Pakistanis. It's meant to provide a 2.5% boost to GDP growth.
And China would gain economically as well. CPEC was intended to reduce oil and gas routes from the Middle East by thousands of miles, a way to cut overland into Western China instead of going around Southeast Asia by ship. Projects in Pakistan also provide Chinese state-owned companies with an additional market. Chinese workers are brought to Pakistan to build infrastructure and then take wages home. CPEC is also strategically significant for China and Pakistan. China wants to strengthen this relationship to counter their shared rival, India.
CPEC is both an instrument of Chinese power as well as a test of Chinese power. If it succeeds, China will be demonstrating that it's able to do what great powers have not been able to do in Pakistan, including the United States.
Which is why Gwadar is so important. It's in Pakistan's Balochistan province, an area with serious electricity and water shortages.
Balochistan province is actually populated by people who are of Baloch origin. They're a different ethnicity. They speak a different language from the majority in power in Islamabad. And they feel, as the poorest province in Pakistan, they have not sufficiently benefited from some of the economic achievements that the rest of Pakistan has had. That area is quite contested by the Balochistan Liberation Army, the people who feel that even Pakistani people have encroached into their territory. So quite a number of people are still staging attacks, and they attacked the biggest international hotel in Gwadar.
All right, welcome to the show tonight. We have a packed house. That was a clip about China's Belt and Road Initiative, something that our guests tonight are pretty excited to talk about. I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to introduce my co-host, my homie, my dog, Pascal Robert.
All right, what's going on, brother Jason? Looking forward to this show.
I mean, this show is so packed with people that I feel like it's not just me and you co-hosting. I feel like Djene is also a bit of a host, because this is also part of like Djene's crew. This is Djene's political Avengers, if you will.
So anything goes wrong, we can blame him, right?
We can blame you. That's the plan. If anybody hates on us and says we're lying or we're some sort of CPC sympathizers or whatever the fuck they say about us,
or if we're working on the behalf of the state.
Oh, that happened too. I think we're working on behalf of the state. I forgot about that. So let's just introduce me, Djene Bajalan.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be back. Great to see you guys.
I mean, the facial hair just gets thicker and thicker every time.
It's cold. We've been dealing with cold weather here in Missouri.
I told you it was 80 degrees today. I should be drinking his hot ass coffee. And he's back. And we had a very, like, I work the chat when you guys are talking, and this gentleman definitely got people excited and angry and excited again. Kuba Wrzesniewski. I totally said your name wrong.
That's okay. I mean, it's Polish. I mean, the very language is wrong, so I can't hold it against you.
And for the first time, making her first time This Is Revolution show appearance, who I'm pretty excited because I want to, per this clip, I want to hear her take on this. Djene, you went to school with this young lady. You want to give her a proper introduction?
Yeah, this is Maria Repnikova. She is a scholar of China in Georgia State, and I believe in DC at the moment. And she's like one of the top experts on China and communications and things like that. And you can read her all over the place, including in the New York Times.
Look at that!
Oh wow!
Look at that!
We're stepping up in the world.
Look at that!
Oh, the ruling class publication of record. We have representative. Excellent.
So let's bring her on. We never get to have. This is usually a sausage party. So Maria, your presence here is. We need to find a way to mix this up just so she can get center stage, right? How do we do this so she gets center? Nope, that's too much of me.
Oh.
Thank you guys for joining in. And I was playing a clip. Where was that from? I forget where that's from. This is from Bloomberg.
No,
that was a Bloomberg clip, which is why there was a Bloomberg economist on the clip about China's Belt and Road Initiative. And I think we have two people that are pretty well versed in Belt and Road with Kuba and Maria. Is that correct?
I spoke about it to the National Defense Transportation Association last year.
Okay.
You know, I was looking at it a little bit from an adversarial perspective, but so I think Maria is the real expert here.
Oh wow, that's a nice way to deflect. To deflect on the new coming guest.
Exactly.
What did you think about that coverage? For actually, both you guys, starting with Maria, what did you think about that? I mean, it's a little bit of a video. I'm not going to play that entire thing. What did you think about that coverage?
Well, it's a little dramatic, right? It's kind of like us versus them. It's, you know, the Americans try to do it, they failed. Now China's coming in, and if it succeeds, it's going to be the great power, and if it fails, it's not a great power. It's very simplistic kind of a way in which everything China does is portrayed these days. So I find it a little bit frustrating. But the expectation that somehow it's going to succeed fully is just it's not realistic, right? It's going to fail in some ways, succeed in others. It's a very complex, very decentralized project. So we'll see some things going well and some things going completely off. And there's lots of pushback, right, in various societies around the world. So I think the pushback is what's interesting, but they make it sound as if it's us versus them, one loses, one wins. I don't think that's how it works. So it's a little bit of a drama piece, I would say.
Did it come off to you like a little bit of Cold War propaganda?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, that's even the music kind of picked up at certain points when I got into the most dramatic pieces about US losing. The tunes got a little more dramatic.
And I think that the whole framing of it, that this is a vacuum that China stepped into when the United States sort of shied away from its global obligations, it lost its nerve. It really meshes well with the whole Joe Biden, America's back, sort of messaging about a kind of reclaiming a leadership role and trying to do everything. And why does it have to be such a binary, right? Especially since the United States has a mixed record of delivering on developmental promises. Why not cooperate, right? Is the Belt and Road not going to be good for Pakistan? Is there a way to sort of make it multilateral? But that's not even discussed. It's just seen as another form of competition, like economic space race.
Oh wow, economic space race. I like that. I never really thought of it from that kind of perspective. I don't know if you guys noticed the picture I used as a thumbnail for the show was an old 50s U.S. Bit of Cold War propaganda called the Red Menace. So that was the thumbnail I used. I figured we were going to probably do a lot of deconstruction of the new Red Menace, which definitely is China, and there's still a little bit of I feel a little bit of that rhetoric with Russia, even though it's not the Red Menace, it's just Russia in general. And
the
also,
Russians.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm saying the Russians, that's all they are.
People also don't realize that, China has a mixed reputation around the world. So, China also faces this similar pushback from peoples around the world, and their influence is, not this kind of unstoppable force that it seems the U.S. media is attempting to portray it as. I think Maria noted, there are pushback, there is criticism in many countries in which China is doing business about the growing influence of China. China is increasingly getting involved in the world, and of course that's going to result in people in places like Africa and Central Asia becoming increasingly critical of China's role.
We had a China expert on about a week or so ago, and we actually had an extensive conversation about how certain people who have Pan-Africanist type of politics are questioning whether China's role in Africa is basically the new imperialists on the block, or is it this kind of bilateral relationship of mutual benefit? And it's particularly on the left, when we have a lot of people who have tendencies that are more sympathetic to China than what you normally get in mainstream media coverage. you'll tend to find people trying to say that this attempt to paint China as a new imperialist on the block in comparison to the United States with 800 plus military bases in the world and the U.S. foreign policy record is kind of ridiculous. But one thing I appreciate about what Maria has already said is that these relationships are always more complicated than we usually get with this kind of binary notion that's this zero-sum game that's very popular in Western media, and the overall Western foreign policy narrative is just the good guys versus the bad guys, and it's the U.S., the bastion of liberty in the world, versus those other people, the yellow peril or the red menace. And these tropes are very consistent in American history. So I think one of the things that we'd like to do is deconstruct that kind of very reductionist narrative of American foreign policy and get into the weeds of what are the ultimate materialist motivations here. But particularly we want to frame this in terms of what does it mean in terms of American foreign policy to have shifted from Trump to Biden. This kind of talk about America is back, et cetera, et cetera. There was an article in the New York Times talking about recently about how the French and the German, Macron, as well as the leader of Germany, are kind of not supporting this, America is back discourse. And they're saying, well, we kind of like dealing with the Chinese and, this America back is stuff, but you can keep your McDonald's and your French fries. And the article was kind of shocked that, the French and the Germans are not, clapping their hands, wanting to wear New York Yankees baseball caps because America's back. So overall, we definitely like to frame our conversation tonight in terms of what are we to expect in this new terrain with Biden, back on the block, and what does it mean in terms of the current geopolitical crisis?
Well, one thing that I'd like to foreground, if we're thinking about China versus the U.S. as global influencers, as potential leaders, their different foreign policy approach to dealing with third countries, is that we're looking at this bilateral, two-power competition at a point where both powers are extraordinarily unpopular. And ironically, the people who like them least are maybe not ironically, are the ones closest to them, their own neighborhood. In East Asia, China could already be a regional leader if it were not for the fact that everyone is frightened of the People's Republic of China. Every other country, and I'm not just talking about sort of Taiwan and South Korea, the typical American-leaning, anti-communist states, but places like Vietnam, Malaysia, even Cambodia and Myanmar, they have profound anxieties about Chinese influence, the deep-seated mistrust of agreements signed with China, low confidence in the transparency and the commitment of the CCP. And the Belt and Road Initiative, as attractive as it is from an economic perspective, has to push against all of those currents. And the repression of the Uyghurs and what China's doing domestically to stamp down dissent, as well as its reaction to criticism from abroad, is not exactly reassuring those countries that are looking at it as a potential successor to American dominance in the region. Similarly, the Europeans, they know America enough to be fed up with the United States and its declarations of being an unparalleled democratic force were somewhat persuasive in the 90s when the memory of World War II was 3 decades closer, and the Cold War had just ended on American terms. But everyone in Washington pretends it's 1996 all the time. Well, the Europeans remember George W. Bush before Trump, and they see the United States as not only a difficult partner to deal with, often self-interested, often unilateral, but also extremely inconsistent. Any deal that you strike with the United States might not outlast the president that you sign it with. Just look at the Iran deal, which was partly a European initiative as well.
I'd like to hear from you.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to throw this in right quick and get your guys' take, especially Kuba and Maria. Derek Varn, who also him and I had not even say a long chat, but we chatted a little bit about China last night after we were done doing whatever we were doing. And he says that the Vietnam is a little worried about the PRC. Why would that be, Maria?
Well, there's been sort of tensions between the two countries for quite some time due to the South China Sea conflict. So that's one of the kind of geopolitical issues that's where China is not willing to step back. So not only Vietnam, but others in the region are very concerned about it. But also, I think it's important to point out that we can't kind of treat all the states as sort of this big monoliths. I mean, oftentimes it's the elites that support China and the society that doesn't, right? So it depends on what kind of government is in place. And we have to distinguish between just people who are suspicious of China and the governments that often make deals with China. So I think that's kind of a big divisive line beyond just regions. It's also just like who is actually in charge versus the public. Does it have a voice? Can it say something? So I'm studying this in Ethiopia, and many people that I've interviewed over a course of about 7 months were very suspicious of China, but the elites are still making deals and they're still positioning themselves as, you know, best friends of China. So those things are quite different. Just wanted to point that out.
Kuba, did you want to add to that?
So in the case of Vietnam specifically, the Vietnamese sided with the Soviet Union in the Sino-Soviet split, and China actually declared war and invaded. They occupied a slice of northern Vietnam. It was a short, sort of savage conflict where China knew better than to try to advance, but Vietnam couldn't stop them either. So both sides kind of declared victory. And the Vietnamese, they were once upon a time a province of China and have very similar culture. And there's been very lengthy history of China looking at them as basically, at best, younger brothers, if not sort of wayward subjects. And that leads to some bad blood that kind of transcends the political moment. The population as a whole has some anti-Chinese instincts that get aggravated when things like the South China Sea territorial dispute or kind of symbolic politics around the memory of the China-Vietnam War, they kick in. So Vietnam doesn't want to fall into a Chinese sphere of influence or end up being too dependent on them, constantly hedging with the United States, despite the even grander and bloodier war that they fought. But it's like Maria said, the elite sees a lot of pragmatic reasons why you need good relations with China. And while you have that instinctive skepticism, that instinctive resistance coming from a public that puts the sort of cultural memory first.
Well, in terms of the U.S. position in China, are we really just seeing basically one global hegemon being worried about the rise of another? Is this really just about, the big boy on the block worrying about someone knocking him off the block and someone bigger coming? I mean, when we see the way in which China is discussed and portrayed in the United States as this kind of like, oh my God, the Chinese, and what they, and how they're, what are they doing today? We could be at war with the Chinese, and it's a very simplistic reductionist kind of reality. But are we just kind of demonstrating? Are we just seeing, I should say, just a kind of desire for the United States to maintain its global primacy in a world in which there are competing forces that it normally wouldn't have to deal with before, and it's unwilling to accept the terms upon which that reality is being laid before it? I mean, what exactly are we talking about in terms of the real motivation behind why the United States sees China as an impending threat upon its geopolitical position?
So I think that very quickly, part of it is that America needs to moralize its leadership, and it needs to explain to itself and to the rest of the world why it's not just the most powerful, but it should be the most powerful. It's a good thing for everybody. It's the right thing. And I think that that's internal. It's internal to American leadership as well as a sort of ideological play. And what I saw with a lot of military people who were a little more cynical about international affairs is that a Cold War is good for business. Having a sizable rival that's ideologically antagonistic, you get all the defense goodies you want. You also can tap into patriotism and anti-communist, anti-Chinese sentiment to tamp down domestic dissent, use that as a cudgel against, it would be the left during the Cold War. Now it would probably be, probably still the left for other reasons. And they had real nostalgia for the good old days when the Soviets were around to push against.
Maria, I'd like to hear your thoughts. If you want to reflect on what's being asked in the chat.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I agree with Kuba about this moralization of leadership. There needs to be some kind of meaning or significance to why we are who we are. And what I noticed going to various workshops in DC about China and Africa in particular, which is what I'm writing my book about right now, is that many officials, including ambassadors, former diplomats, all kinds of people, they get really emotional and sensitive when we think about China taking over, right? This China's influence is treated not just kind of as a political or strategic kind of conversation, but it's almost at the level of emotions. It's like, oh, we're losing to them. Like, we're losing. Like, who are we if we don't have that kind of appeal? If we're not the world leader, then who exactly, are we in the world? So that's something that I think has a deeper significance for U.S. national identity than I ever really understood before I started doing this research. But also, yes, it is also money. So if we think about like China-Russia relations, right? They often get also placed in this conversation as China and Russia coming closer together. They're aligning, they're becoming best friends. So we have to kind of try to split them up, or we try to kind of create a conflict. All of that is money. All of that is, paying experts and increasing our defense and so forth. But if you say that they're not actually that dangerous, or if things are not as bad as you think, there's no money in that. So that kind of comment, nobody wants to hear it. So in some ways, it's both the defense interests, but also, I think, ethical, moral interests that are very much entwined in many ways. But I think also there's another issue here, is that China at this point is seen as an adversary and as a very unfriendly actor by everybody in the community, including business people, liberals, conservatives, all kinds of groups, because China is seen as not reciprocating. So they're getting away with a lot of unfair practices in trade and business and many other ways. So that's something that I think is also at the heart of this competition.
When you say not reciprocating, can you elaborate on that in terms of not following through with business obligations, in terms of contracts and things of that nature, technological questions about, technological usage or violating trade, copyright? When you say China, elaborate on what you mean by that.
Sorry, I think I froze for a second. I don't know if you can still hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
No? Okay, great. So what I mean by that is that there is a sense, I think, especially amongst business people in the US, is that they had very unfair access to Chinese markets. The Chinese are able to invest and do all kinds of things here in the States. Chinese media has had a huge presence here, not successful, but they had a lot of access. Chinese cultural institutes, Confucius institutes have access, but Americans have very limited access, including media, including business people. So I think there's a sense that there's this really unfair relationship. And that unfairness is felt out throughout the world. And that's something I think is at the heart of the current animosity, and it's not going to go away. That's at the heart of the current friction.
So the fact that China is more protective about its media thoroughfare, you don't have free reign to advertise. Facebook is not in China, while Chinese products are able, like you have TikTok, you have, and all this other stuff being in the West, is something that causes a significant amount of anxiety amongst not only American, but Western partners, Western players overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that it just feels as if, it's not a fair competition. Like we're in some ways, getting kind of limited access or pushed out of China, but they're welcome here. So now we're seeing pushback, which is very much kind of in this ideological way where Chinese media is also now kicked out, called foreign agent. Britain just suspended the license of CGTN. So there's all kinds of new measures that are being taken to limit China. And the reaction here, the explanation is that this is in due course. We're not allowed there; they shouldn't be allowed here. It's kind of like a tit for tat, eye for an eye. We should just kind of punish them. But so far, the reaction it got in China is just to punish us more. So all we're doing is we're pushing them to the limit, and they're pushing further. They're not, yielding. There's no yielding to this. So it's kind of a dangerous spin, but I'm not seeing much of a resolution or improvement from these policies.
Wow.
In politics, better than many Americans. And American
hold on, Kuba. You gotta rewind back a little bit because you were quiet.
Sorry,
Maria and Pascal for that second. So what were you saying?
So one of the sore spots for market access has been big financial firms, and we all understand the influence of finance and hedge funds, the big players in U.S. politics. And they were prevented from accessing the Chinese market. But bit by bit, whenever there's too much kind of overt hostility or friction between China and the United States, they announced that another hedge fund, they announced that another investment bank can offer products in China, another big financial firm can enter the Chinese market. So even as they keep barriers up and are willing to play very aggressive defense of their protectionist development strategy in many fields, especially intellectual property, for instance, they understand that they can buy a lot of slack by letting the right peak financial interests enter their market.
And I would also add something, and there was a question, there was a comment by Derek Brown in the chat. This is not too dissimilar from the position of Britain vis-a-vis the United States 100 years ago. I would agree with that. Britain, as the top dog, wanted access to the American market, which America was behind protective barriers. I think the one thing that people in the West don't often comprehend is the kind of historical memory, and not just in China, but in places like in Turkey and other parts of the Middle East, where European access and American access to the markets occurred exactly at a time of were extremely detrimental. The British forced open the Ottoman markets and devastated the handicraft industries there. British and American missionaries entered into the Ottoman Empire, entered into China, and again were seen at least as attacking the very foundations of those countries' societies and cultures. And with China, the Chinese markets were literally blown open by British drug dealers to force opium consumption on the Chinese. So that China and other countries around the world are skeptical about West, opening up to the West. It has very good historical reasons and precedents to it.
Also, just to chime in real quick, the most successful developmental model of the post-war period has been the East Asian developmental state. And that's Japan used it, South Korea, Taiwan, and it is precisely what China is doing, where you have you take advantage of the openness of the American market, but you protect your own industries, you incentivize the transfer of technology, you only allow investment and entry of foreign firms if they do joint ventures or if they sign over certain technologies, and you have a planned developmental strategy to move up the value chain and take up peak positions in advancing industries. It's very successful. Everybody should do it. But the only people who can get away with it are either essentially U.S. allies during the Cold War or countries big enough to push back. Otherwise, you're just supposed to do the neoliberalism, let the big American companies, the big multinationals come in and do whatever they want.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be that extreme, right? I mean, it's also over time those countries have opened up, right? So it's not like you stay that way forever. So one of the big complaints is that China is no longer at the same stage. So over time, there's expectations shift and policies evolve. But under President Xi, there's a lot more centralization of the economy. Not all of it is that productive. So the developmental state model is not static. It actually has a lot of shapes and forms. And Chinese model is not the same model as, South Korea or Japan. And in fact, in many African countries, they're studying South Korea. They're not studying China. So there's a lot of variation across those states. I think China right now is actually making quite a few mistakes, but that's part of it is also, it's an autocratic country, right? It's a centralized party state with a personalistic leadership at the moment. So, yeah.
I just wanted to draw the contrast between the developmental state and the neoliberal sort of Washington consensus model that was supposed to be the gold standard, but didn't really work anywhere.
Sure, I just wanted to complicate that black box of developmental state.
A Polish person can't do anything without a Russian complicating it.
That's how it is.
Maria, since you're actually working on a book about China's relationship with Africa right now, I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are in terms of China's role in Africa. And, do you consider them to be, or do you view China as a new imperialist in Africa? Or is there a certain bilateral nature between at least the African ruling class, depending on the country, and its relationship with China, in which the African countries feel that they're getting some actual beneficial infrastructure development, maybe, educational development as well, or institutional mechanisms that improve society from the relationships with China that they were reticent to get from the West and the United States in consideration of relationships with institutions like the IMF and the World Bank in the past, or the way the West would influence the political realities of those countries when China tends to be reticent to do that. So I'd like to hear you elaborate on that if you would.
Yeah, lots of questions packed into one there, but I'll try to answer a few. But I'm working more on the aspects of education and kind of human capacity. So more about kind of trainings, elite trainings in China, educating people in Chinese language, spreading Chinese media. So it's often referred to as so-called soft power, right? It's a very tired term, but that's what China is embracing in Africa in particular. So I'm looking at to what extent they're actually effective and how unequal, these relationships are. So, I mean, two things. First of all, of course, there are many benefits and lots of agency that African elites, but also young people have vis-a-vis China. So it's not all top-down, kind of neo-colonial. That would be very much simplifying the role of, I think, Africans themselves. In particular, I was looking at Ethiopia, and I found that, the elites, they are able to negotiate different deals because China is in now. So they're able to bring in Turkey. They're bringing in, now some Gulf states are participating in investments. Russia is coming back, and U.S. is quite absent. So the more players they're there, the better deals they get. So to them, China is kind of a negotiating card. So that's one thing they're getting out of it. The second thing is that they're using it to get access to different resources outside of just investments and infrastructure. So, for example, many elites and students, they are now studying in China. So over 80,000 African students are currently in China. And not all of it is for scholarships. Most of it is just, it's a very low-cost degree. So they get to study there for a very low cost in comparison to the US or Europe. When you ask them where they want to go, they say, I'd still like to come to the States, but your door is closed. Like there's no way to get in. So they want to come here, but there are so few opportunities, and it's so expensive and so complicated. China is extremely accessible kind of presence. It's a very experiential, that's what I describe it, is that you can experience China easily in all dimensions. So I think people take advantage of it, but they're also cynical and they're pushing back, and there's a lot of satire and also outright critique. So just because they're using the resources doesn't mean they're believing or kind of ascribing to China's worldview or even loving Chinese culture or people. So there are lots of tensions and frictions, but at the same time, lots of agency to take advantage of this kind of pragmatic approach towards soft power and towards Africa in general that China is practicing.
Excellent. Would you consider it a better alternative than what the West has offered in the past?
Oh, well, better or worse, yeah, that's a little bit tricky because both of them are highly problematic. But I think that it depends on what, people themselves in Africa are preferring. And at the moment, many would say that China is offering more choices, more resources than what they're getting from others. But in comparison to the past, there are many analogies made also to this ideas of inequality, and there are all kinds of allegations of labor rights abuses and debt trap diplomacy. So it's not really, it's by no means perfect, right? But one could say that they're getting more out of it at this time because of it's a competitive card and it gives something that they can take advantage of.
And
now, Okay, go ahead.
I'd just like to add something about that. You're seeing a similar development in Turkey. Turkey is increasingly attempting to sort of manage a more independent foreign policy. It's been traditionally under the Western umbrella, but under the Erdogan government, Turkey has got, has sought to chart out a more independent foreign policy, and that in part involves security agreements with Russia, but it also includes seeking investment from China. And seeking that investment from China in Turkey is a very good example of how elite policies and popular opinion can basically run up against each other, because Turkey has a long history of sympathy with other Turkic peoples around the world, and that includes the Uyghur minority in China. And there was a lot of popular sympathy, including amongst Erdogan's allies on the far right in Turkey, towards the plight of the Uyghurs. However, at the same time, Turkey is desperate to get investment from China. So, you do, and Maria alluded to this within the context of Africa, but you do see this kind of dichotomy between popular perceptions of China and its influence around the world, and what the elites want to do and how they see China. And I think, in the case of Turkey, again, China is seen as having, it's seen as being an alternative and some way to try and get a better deal out of Europe and the United States as well. So you have this popular dichotomy, this popular sort of perception of China in Turkey as oppressing the Uyghur minority, with a government that is increasingly orientating itself towards China.
Excellent. I think we're going to pivot.
Djene, can I just ask you something? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sure.
No, go ahead, Maria.
I just wanted to ask, Djene, I know we're pivoting towards Middle East, but since Turkey itself is becoming such a big power, also in Africa, I was curious, beyond Chinese influence in Turkey, is Turkey competing with China in terms of, investments, deals, and soft power in the developing world? So is it becoming kind of an emerging power also as much as receiving Chinese influence within Turkey?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an attempt in Turkey to exercise influence in Africa as well. I'm not as well versed in it as you are versed in Chinese influence, but this has been a long-standing issue, and a lot of the initial influence was pioneered not directly by the state, but by the Fethullah Gülen movement, this religious movement that is led by a Turkish religious exile. So you had this huge religious foundation basically engaging in missionary work in Africa, which is cheap for the Turks to do. They can do this. And they would have the big Turkish Olympics, where they would get Guyana children to sing sing Turkish poetry and things like that. So it was definitely the soft power. A lot of it was initially not directly, nothing in Turkey is ever completely separate from the government, but was not directly initiated by the government. You also had the fact that Turkish businessmen were used to pioneering in rough and tough markets. So, places like Libya, Turkish businessmen would go out there because, Western businessmen wouldn't go out there, and they would, try and get a place. So obviously Turkey doesn't have the same resources as China does. But yes, they've been attempting especially to create relations with Africa. And obviously since the falling out between the Fethullah Gülen movement and the AKP government, a lot of those networks that have been established, not only in Africa, but in places like the Balkans and the Philippines, all over the place, where you have these Turkish schools, those have been more directly brought under state supervision and control. So I think we're seeing Turkey doing a parallel thing to China in many African markets. I don't know so much about competition between the two sides, but definitely Turkey doesn't have the same position in the world economy and world geopolitics as China does. And so Turkey, especially as Turkey's economy is on the rocks, is increasingly desperate for that Chinese money, as a way to balance out that traditional dependence on the United States. Turkey's advantage in the international system historically has been that they were able to get away with a lot of things because they were under the American umbrella. But as when you try and play in the bigger leagues, your position changes, and there's definitely a big shift towards Eurasianism, looking towards China and Russia amongst the dominant factions in the Turkish establishment. The transatlantist wing of Turkish politics is, well, the civilian wing is out of power, and the military wing basically got kind of booted out of the military after the 2016 failed coup. I hope that was cool. But I think there is a comparison.
That was excellent.
I think there's a comparison to be made, definitely.
Yeah, Maria, you want to take on that question about, is India competing with China in Africa?
Yeah, I think India is competing in terms of education in particular. There are lots of Indian teachers across African universities, and also India is offering a lot of scholarships. So there's a lot of influence in that way. There are lots of long-term kind of relationships that are formed. But I think China is starting to overtake that just because of the scale of influence is so large that increasingly more students are heading to China. But many have had better experience in India. It's kind of, they feel culturally more sort of closer. They feel like they can adapt to the food easier. They speak English there. So everything is sort of quicker and faster, and they enjoy India quite a bit. But China is increasingly becoming more and more attractive. So there is contestation in that way.
Well, what's fascinating to me is that you're talking about all these soft power initiatives in Africa, when the United States, as the gambit that it's playing, seems to be the development of AFRICOM and military bases. So, I mean, it's a very interesting kind of comparison in terms of who's using what to influence the opinions of the people on the continent, while China is using all this soft power. The U.S. is coming in with guns and no butter. So that's a very kind of interesting way to look at.
As the representative from the military-industrial complex, let me weigh in here. America had the experience of the post-Cold War, post-colonial period, where you didn't have to think about what African people, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Congo, whether it's Ethiopia, thought, because you just needed to get the support of key military figures, launch a coup, and then you had your proxy. And America has very strong military-to-military relationships across Africa. It does not have the same penetration into culture. And it also has, I think it's not particularly good at making an appeal to Africa that goes beyond this is a land of opportunity, globalization is good, here's some McDonald's pitch that it broadcasts globally. So it's leveraging and deepening its military-to-military relationships as a means of sidestepping the public diplomacy angle, the public diplomacy element, where it might not be able to compete effectively without doing things that it really doesn't want to. While building up AFRICOM, that's a bigger defense budget. Selling weapons to African countries, that's a bigger defense budget. Going after Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, going after Boko Haram, that plays well to American anxieties. At least it did before sort of the war on terror got backburnered. And in a lot of ways, we'll see what the more effective strategy is. It's very much in flux what the future of Africa looks like, and whether these business and public diplomacy, sort of soft power strategies will bear fruit, or whether, at least in some places, the military-to-military relationships will be decisive.
Well, I can tell you which is going to cause more bloodshed. It's not going to be the soft power.
Part of it
I'm not saying it's good.
The US doesn't believe it needs soft power. Yeah, I mean, part of it, the US doesn't believe it needs soft power, right? I mean, in Africa, a lot of the diplomats I spoke to, they think we are the most desired, right? Like, anybody who wants to come to the US, the best people will come to the US, right? That's the answer I often got. Do we need to invest more in education? Do we need to attract more, African students? Well, the best will make it here. The best will break through all the ropes. They're going to make it here. But the rest, will go to China. Like all the kind of the garbage will go to China. But that's kind of very arrogant perspective that a lot of these diplomats have. So they don't believe we need to increase soft power, because we think we're still the best. We're number one. So China is not going to ever outbid us when it comes to attraction. That's actually the inherent belief of many people.
So it's
always 1996.
So the hubris of American empire is basically stopping it from recognizing any kind of humane, remote humane kind of way of dealing with Africa in terms of they can actually deal with on terms that are more, beneficial mutually in terms of developing, relationships that in the way that China is doing, more soft power and less, military weaponry. So, I mean, that's the way I would look at it based on what Maria is saying, is that the hubris of American empire is the obstacle to developing alternatives of engaging in foreign policy mechanisms that are actually less, belligerent.
I also, you have to throw in immigration. There are a level of popular opposition to immigration in the United States has been steadily increasing. The level of frustration with immigrants, legal or undocumented, is that's one of the waves that Trump rode to his election. And if you want to make good on a soft power promise as the United States, the land of opportunity, the shining city on a hill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that means you got to take some immigrants. And is the United States willing to do that?
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing that China doesn't take immigrants either. They take even fewer immigrants, but the people only go for a few years and they're kicked out.
The culture is enough of a barrier.
A claim.
Yeah, exactly. It's not supposed to be where you make your where you do your coming to America story.
Not yet, anyway.
Not yet.
I like Maria's moxie. I tell you, she's all about collapsing the mythology of American exceptionalism. That I find that appealing, quite frankly.
I mean, American exceptionalism has a pernicious effect both on American domestic politics, but also on American foreign policy. And as America's position in the world changes, American exceptionalism becomes an even more dangerously delusional. It was already a delusional ideology, but it becomes an even more dangerous delusional ideology because it becomes a self-defeating ideology. And I think that's what the ultimate game is. To return to Biden's speech, Biden comes in, gives a speech about America's back baby and America's allies, right? America's allies are, well, maybe we don't want you back that much, maybe, and Americans cannot conceive that even in the places where they feel that the people should be most grateful, in Europe, anti-Americanism sells in a way that it hasn't before. There was a whole load of things. There was a whole load of things. I mean, with the exception of Britain, which is delusional and in the process of disintegration as a state. But there was a recent, thing about, France is going through its own cultural camp at the moment, and there's deep paranoia amongst the liberal establishment about Islam and the failure to integrate the Muslim minority. And obviously, the whipping boy becomes Muslim, Muslim immigrants or descendants of Muslim immigrants, primarily from North Africa to France. But part of this cultural camp is pitched in this insidious Islamo-gauchisme, the Islamic leftism, which is this notion that Islamists and leftists are in some kind of alliance to undermine secular Republican values. And interestingly enough, the way that it was pitched by Macron, and I think in the French media, was the pernicious influence of American
universities,
American university culture, which I find hilarious because it's all American university professors who read Foucault, Fanon, Brodel, all these people. But that's by the by. And people looked at it. The way I saw it, at least initially, was that this is the weaponization of anti-Americanism. That anti-Americanism can be against the hillbilly Texas cowboy, which has a long tradition in France, but it's also against seen as a decadent liberal American culture that is infecting China. And I think anti-Americanism, or at least an ambivalence to America, has a great deal of popular cachet across continental Europe. Yeah, Islamism is the French version of cultural Marxism. It's like a complete fantastical thing invented by the American right, by the French right, but now is mainstream to an extent that it had not been before. And mainstream by Macron, who is increasingly leaning towards the political right.
Well, we realize that Macron politically has to throw his dog biscuits to the right because he's worried about Marine Le Pen. So as a result, I think he sees his political position being such a threat that the rise of the reactionary right in France causes him to try to basically pivot in a way that he's using that kind of rhetoric and discourse. Though we could spend a whole show talking about France and its politics as well. And since we talked about Islam, we're going to move on to you, Djene, and pivot about, in terms of the United States, we spent the first 20 so odd years of the millennium basically in the post 9/11 environment, engaged in the morass of various wars in the Middle East. Most of the fulcrum of American foreign policy in the millennium has been about the Middle East. Are we seeing in the post-Trump environment a pivot away from the Middle East or the Muslim world being the focus of American foreign policy, and now actually trying to engage towards what is more seen as direct threats, i.e. the rise of China, Russia-China cooperation, and things of that nature? In other words, when you're hearing reports about, Biden and or Trump talking about pulling troops out of Afghanistan, which is a Muslim country, not necessarily the Middle East, or even Syria, are we seeing that, basically we have reached the breaking point with the war on terror posturing and it's on to other bigger and better things? Or is there still more bloodlust left for what's going on in the Muslim world?
Yeah, I mean, I think within, and perhaps Kuba knows a little bit more about this from the inside, but I think always within the American military sort of military-industrial complex and the foreign policy establishment, especially on the political right, there was always some kind of division between those who saw China as the greater threat and saw the Middle East as a distraction, and those who were ideologically driven towards what they saw as, exporting democracy to the Middle East. And of course, 9/11 was the opportunity for the neocons to implement that plan for the Middle East, and it failed dramatically. And it failed dramatically on their terms. Like every single objective of the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq has failed, right? Has utterly and completely failed. Iran has been empowered in Iraq. Iran had no influence in Iraq beforehand. Al-Qaeda has metastasized, and we have something even worse. We have ISIS, and that nightmare's going away. There was Obama had this policy, pivot towards China, and part of the strategic argument of the Obama administration about the withdrawal from Iraq was, yes, Iraq was a disaster, but was also that wasting resources and energy on the Middle East is distracting from where we should be focusing those resources, which is the Pacific Ocean, and and combating China. That's what Obama's policies was. That was what TPP was all about. It was about this pivot to Asia. And the problem is, once you've got yourself into the mess, America cannot be militarily defeated, and Americans can't accept the defeat. So we end up with this kind of ongoing stalemate where, although I think many people would like to withdraw from the Middle East and draw down and just basically leave it to the Middle Easterners, it's extremely difficult for them to do without, conceding a major American defeat, which are just, American exceptionalism doesn't allow them to contemplate this defeat, whether it was Obama and then the Trump issue is that you had Trump come in and, like a bull in the china shop, kicked away some of the scaffolding that had been created, at least to de-escalate some of the tensions with Iran. And, Biden thinks that you can just go back to the Iran nuclear deal. I'm skeptical as it's about whether it's going to be as easy as possible, easy as some people seem to think it is. I mean, I don't know what other people think, but I think many people now look at the Middle East diversion as 20 years when they should have actually been focusing on China.
Well, I was going to ask you guys, we've been going for an hour. That hour flew the fuck by. Can you guys go for another few minutes, or are you guys all spun out?
I can go for a bit more.
Yeah. If Djene's game, I'm game.
Oh, is this a competition?
Oh, gosh, all this male power, All right, I'll join in as well.
So you're gonna because the whole thing was we were originally going to try to get everybody's expertise in on the show, and the chat just kind of blew up on this China thing, and we're trying to shoehorn Djene in here. Maybe we have to have a brown only day, Djene. Just you and a bunch of brown people. That's it.
Haji Day. We'll call it Haji Day.
Haji Day.
That's great.
Well, I think that we should encourage Maria's participation here to be, to give some gender balance. Man.
Maria's coming with the fire, man. So let's remember here, Maria was who Djene originally had referred to us, but she was too busy. So.
Oh, really? When was that?
So you're telling me that was the consolation prize for the Navalny?
You are beyond the consolation prize. You're the girl in the 80s movies that's got paint on her overalls.
Wow, Maria's getting a lot of.
Wait, is that like a Polish tradesman jab? Right? I see how it is. You can't get the Tsarina, so we'll get the Polish plumber in here. I got you.
We all know Kuba is the Polish aristocrat who turned up at the Sejm to basically undermine Polish centralization. That's who he is. He's far too simple.
Yeah, Kuba is very mysterious,
Kuba's the pretty girl that you didn't see all along. She was there all along, being beautiful, and then she took her glasses off, and you're like,
I think
"Oh my God!"
Everybody saw Kuba. He's very visible.
It's Mary Stuart Masterson. There you go.
Kuba is way too sympathetic to Russia for a Polish person. I will say that. I've never met a Polish person who is sympathetic to the Russians. The Polish literally have an alphabet that is completely unsuitable to their language, simply because they don't want to be mixed up with Russians.
Well, listen. Now that Djene has brought up Russian, we have Maria.
Nicely spoken, Turk.
We have Maria here, who is Russian. I'd like to hear her thoughts. We had Kuba a couple of weeks ago talking about Navalny and Russia and so on and so forth. I'd like to hear your position, Maria, in terms of how does Putin fit into all of this with the current internal crisis he's facing with the protests as well, losing his supremacy as a kind of petroleum-dependent country in itself with the current depreciating cost prices of oil and petroleum in the world. Is Russia kind of seeing itself as losing influence, still maintaining influence? You can give us a little bit of your opinion on the Russiagate kind of farce that we had in the United States as well. I'd like to hear your particular thoughts on how exactly, because Russia, obviously because of Cold War history, looms large in the boogeyman, a consciousness of American society, and America always feels that Russia is the puppet master of the world. They're behind everything, as if other countries don't have agency. So, please, let us hear some of your thoughts in terms of where Russia fits in this kind of global chess game we're talking about.
Well, first of all, I'm feeling the boogeyman Russia thing on my own skin. Being in America all the time, being asked where I'm from because I still have an accent, as you can hear. So whenever I say Russian, it's like, oh my God, I've dated a Russian woman once, or my grandfather is Russian. There's just so much exotification or either fear or love for Russia that just kind of overwhelms me on every Uber drive or whatever else. So yeah, being Russian is fun. But also I grew up in Latvia, so it's been kind of a mixed experience. I'm not, brought up in Russia itself, so I've had the experience of Latvians as well who were occupied, and it was a very different struggle. But when it comes to Russia's position in the world, I think that, we often kind of jump into these conclusions that, there's a movement or Russia is losing influence. But, the external kind of show of influence is so important for Putin and for his legitimacy. So I don't think that they're going to stop, or he's going to stop trying to assert influence, much more, I think, aggressive and in many ways more malicious than what China is doing anytime soon. So the more he's facing challenges at home, the more we're going to see Russia pushing outwards, interfering in democratic processes, showcasing its power in various ways. So I don't think there's kind of a slowdown to what Russia is up to, but it also doesn't have the same resources as China when it comes to these softer aspects of power that I talked about. They're not as interested in soft power. They're more interested in kind of coercive power. So that's a big distinction. And also with the protests, there's so much also power that the state has to limit this protest. I mean, many people are getting arrested, scared. Navalny himself is in jail. So I guess I'm a little bit pessimistic when it comes to big changes happening in Russia or Russia becoming more open or democratic anytime soon. I still think it has a long way to go. That's my sense.
Can I just add something to that? I mean, we literally in the last couple of months have seen Russia exercise that foreign policy power. The entire Azerbaijan-Armenia war was entirely preventable by Russia. I mean, if Russia tells the Azeris no invasion, the Azeris can't do it. And so there was a reordering in the Caucasus, but Russian influence ends up in the ground. Russian peacekeepers were dispatched to Nagorno-Karabakh. The Armenians were laid low. The Armenians, although they weren't actually doing it, there was a new prime minister in Armenia. There was like, maybe this guy's, I mean, Armenia had been dominated by ex-Soviet apparatchiks since independence. Suddenly you have this guy from outside of the system coming in, and it's like, okay, we need to show this guy who's boss. So the Russians have shown this very recently that in the Azerbaijan-Armenia war. And I would also like to add something. A mutual friend of ours, Maria and I, who is also Russian, came to visit me once, and she insisted on walking around Springfield, Missouri with a "Make America Great Again" hat on. It was an experience.
Wow.
I'm sure it was fun.
Yeah.
She's a very provocative, friend of ours. We have to bring her on. She's gonna be.
Yeah, she's great.
Doing it as a joke, or she really was like didn't get.
No, she was doing it as a joke and going, "Hello, I'm from Russia," with a great, with like walking around, and we took her to Golden Corral, and she thought it was amazing.
You took, first of all, was this before Corona?
This was before Corona. Golden Corral was amazing, and like it's one of the best things in America. Like honestly,
Golden Corral is an amazing restaurant, especially on steak night.
Yeah, steak night is where Golden Corral is. I think that's one of my favorite things about the United States. Do you have Golden Corral? Like, have you guys been to? Do they have
Golden Corral's in the sticks where I'm at. There's none in Oakland. You got to go way out. Like
I've never heard of it. It's some mysterious thing.
Do you eat at buffets, Maria?
It's a complete buffet. You don't
do buffets?
It's the complete embodiment of American excess.
Wait, what did you say? You don't do buffets at all?
I used to do them too much when I moved here, and that just kind of, it struck me down. At some point, my buffet limits were reached to the maximum, and I couldn't do it anymore.
I actually had a Polish.
I'm being careful.
I had a Polish coworker who told me that they always took people from Poland and the Czech Republic who visited. They always wanted to go to Golden Corral because they thought it was the best value for money.
It so is. You can literally
very practical
vomit, and you don't have to eat the next day.
Very practical, and it's better than going to like Wendy's or something like that. You get all the same stuff as you get at Wendy's, but you can also have a steak.
Someone said you got to leave room for soft serve at Golden Corral and the chocolate fountain.
I'm sitting here amazed at all the intellectual firepower we have in this room, and people are talking about dining at Golden Corral and Wendy's. Man, you guys, boy, wow.
It's good to know that we're not talking to these fucking stuck-up ass people that are like Golden Corral. I've never been of your regular people dining establishments.
Are you saying I'm stuck up, or what's going on?
Well, no. Apparently, you've been to Golden Corral, so that's literally the antithesis of stuck up. I've never
been to Golden Corral,
Well, you've never been. You've been to Hometown Buffet.
No, that's it. I'm out of the game.
You should try Golden Corral.
Wait, is she in the South, Gene?
I don't know. You're in Georgia. Georgia, right?
I'm usually in Georgia, but I'm not very much there. I traveled a lot, so now I'm in DC.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I was gonna say if you're in
when you
Georgia,
come and
there's
visit Maria, I'll take you to Golden Corral. It's a great experience. It's
that's
very
the most
American.
American shit you're ever gonna
great
do.
American experience.
It's a
Yeah,
great
that's the
American
most
experience.
American.
You guys are you? Okay, I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
We are all gonna take you to a Golden Corral and just stare like hey, she's Russian. She's eating Golden Corral for the first time.
Oh my God! Way to make me feel different. That's just not okay. All right.
Now everybody's talking about their favorite shitty buffet. Well, you're in the middle of the country.
I'm in the heartland of America.
Yeah.
Right? I'm in the heartland of America.
You have
I'm
another
I'm
place
an American
there.
gallbladder.
You have another place where you are called Western Sizzlin'. Have you been to one of those?
No, I haven't. I haven't been to West. I only go to Golden Corral. It's literally the only place I can go and eat now because everywhere else seems overpriced. If I want good food, I'll cook good food at home.
That's how I feel sometimes if I go to like a Sizzler. Do you guys have Sizzler? And I'm like, I'm not paying more than $10 for a steak.
Exactly. Why would you pay more money?
I like it when the
My dad
restaurant
likes
is part of a gas station, right? Like, and it's got like a gift shop, and it's got like a giant parking lot, and you can, join the military and buy a gun, all same place while you're gassing up.
Well,
that to me.
There's actually a book about that.
There's a book about that.
One of the best books by a Soviet journalist is called One Story America, and it has the main theme is those gas station restaurants, and those Soviet journalists just absolutely puzzled by all the shit that those gas stations have, and all the burgers and everything. And there were strip dancers, and everything was in the gas station. So the whole book is about all these gas station wonders. So it used to be way more fun, apparently.
I learned about them from an absurdist 90s video game where with like a police private inspector dog and like a little psychotic rabbit, and I assumed that it was part of the absurdism. And then I got to Texas and I'm like, no, right there. Yeah, they just drew it. They drew it from memory.
Also, there's a little secret about gas station truck stops. TAs, truck stops, whatever you order, whatever entree you order, if you finish it, they give you another one for free.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Short secret.
That's too much.
Well, not only do we have two Golden Corrals in Springfield, Missouri, we also have the Bass Pro Store Museum and the National Rifle Association Museum.
That's America kicking your ass right there.
That's like 100% American. Opposite, Buckingham's Barbecue, as featured in Man vs. Food.
Is that like a Toby Keith song that's come to life, right? Like, is this a place?
Their vision of America.
Exactly, like
coming to life.
Enough of them dreamed it, so it came to be.
Yeah, pretty much. I
So
mean,
if you guys have something you want to say to the
All right,
chat,
then.
just go ahead and yell it out because they can hear you guys, of course. But you can't type.
Maria,
that.
someone asked your last name, so if you can't spell it out, you can just say it.
Okay, that's a little bit of a sensitive question, but I guess I can answer.
Oh, if you don't want to,
It's
answer it, that's
Repnikova.
fine.
Renikova?
Well, I already answered it, so
Okay.
Repnikova.
And now 1,500
Very
Facebook
Russian last
requests.
name.
There you go.
It means turnip, so it's not that exciting.
does it really mean turnip?
It means turnip?
Yeah, the root of the word is turnip, and when
The
I was
root.
little, they also confused it with Chlebnikova, which means bread. So neither of them are very sophisticated kind of meanings. Just bread and turnips, the basics.
What does your unpronounceable surname mean, Kuba?
There's a town called Wrzesn, and the month of September is Wrzesień, so it either means you're from the town or you were born in September.
Mine means toll collector.
Oh, I like that.
Literally.
I'm going to call you Gene Taxman from now on.
There's actually a
Yeah,
debate
I
about
think
it.
it fits your,
There's a big debate about it because like a bunch of Kurdish people are like, no, it's an ancient Kurdish word. And I'm of the opinion, like I subscribe to the theory that it was a name given by the Ottomans to our tribe because our main thing was robbing people on the Iranian Ottoman border back in the day. So, you know.
Oh, I just thought of a question I want to ask because I've been reminded of this, and this I'd like to hear the opinions of our guests who come from various parts of the world. There's been there's a leftist intellectual I know who complains about the fact that people in the left in the United States did not seriously take the threat of Trump as a fascist seriously enough. And that, his position is that Trump is a fascist and that, he should be treated as such. And I know we're out of the Trump era. We're now on to Biden. But in retrospect, I would like to know from our foreign policy experts here that what their perception of the Trump presidency was in relation to the history of Americans' perception in the world, being an international kind of a group of individuals we have here on the panel. Do you think that the notion of calling Trump a fascist is kind of, accurate or ridiculous or ludicrous? Or is Trump just another constellation in the rise of reactionary nationalists that was already demonstrated in Europe, but simply transported to the United States? So, I kind of like to take some reflection on the part of our panel in terms of, was Trumpism bad for America overall? I mean, I think obviously people have opinions, or what their reflections are in terms of what it really meant. Are we glad that Biden is president? Let's hear what we have to say.
I can start if I'll start. And being a Polish person, Polish Canadian, born in Poland, grew up in Canada, sort of worked in both countries, as well as the U.S. I understand fascism. The Polish political culture is about half fascist. I mean, that's the bad news. The good news is that it's an Eastern European country that's only half fascist. So that kind of chauvinistic nationalism, skepticism for democracy, and a lack of a real internalized commitment to civic liberties, that's a very strong strain of Polish political culture, and Trump is very popular in Poland. He has the instincts of a fascist ideologically. He doesn't have any respect for American civic traditions or institutions. He utter contempt for any idea of inclusiveness or multiculturalism. He has no intellectual integrity. But he's just too lazy, right? The problem with the statement that the left didn't take him seriously enough as a fascist isn't the fascist part, it's seriously enough. He's not a serious leader. If he wanted to follow through on institutionalizing fascism, on consolidating power in an authoritarian manner, like Orban succeeded doing in Hungary, or like the Law and Justice Party is doing in Poland, he could have. The alignment was there for him to succeed, but that requires bureaucratic fluency, that requires energy, that requires initiative, that requires, like HR. You have to do a whole bunch of management stuff, a whole bunch of leadership stuff that Trump is just too lazy and disinterested to do. So I think that the unwillingness to sort of overreact to Trump as a threat to the underlying institutions of American politics is the attitude was reasonable, right? Like ultimately the whole storming the Capitol event on January 6th was a farce, right? If it had been done seriously, it could have succeeded, but there was never any risk of that. As for whether it's good that Biden's back, for me, it's the choice in 2016 was between when it was Clinton and Trump, it was, you can either have pancreatic cancer or you can have Ebola. Trump is Ebola. It's going to be terrible. It's going to be very destructive. No one's going to like it. It's going to be messy, but some people get better. While Hillary Clinton represented the continuation of a long malignancy, hollowing out, a sickness in the bones. And it turns out that after you get over the Ebola, you can still have pancreatic cancer if you want. So I think that it's not going to be as messy. It's not going to be as ugly. There's certain risks that are off the table, but the neoliberal hollowing out of the American economy, the penury of the middle class, the desperation of the working class, the intensification of management and policing, the intensification of political anger and hatred. We're going to get 4 years of that, 4 more years of that kind of wannabe West Wing, slow, painful decline. And then we'll see what happens in 2024.
Okay, let's move on to Maria. What are your thoughts?
Well, Kuba kind of gave us, the pessimistic forecast. So I think I unfortunately, I'm in a similar camp as far as what to think of Biden. But Trump popularity and what Trump actually represents for the world, I think one of the surprising things for me was how much he was strategically used by different groups that were out for their own interests, such as Taiwanese, Hankanese, Chinese intellectuals who are really big fans of Trump still. So I found it fascinating that it wasn't so much about fascism or his ideologies, but it was more about kind of using him for what he can do vis-a-vis China or vis-a-vis other interests. So many, really smart intellectuals were disputing the fairness of this election. And I'm talking about Chinese intellectuals, including Ai Weiwei, a famous artist, many of you have heard of him perhaps, who is really beloved by the West as this anti-China figure. Anti-Chinese Communist Party was saying that the election was, false, the results are a lie, and so forth. And there's this big debate as to why this kind of seemingly liberal people, interesting intellectuals from other countries are so attracted to Trump. So I think it just kind of raises a lot of questions. If we think about even Navalny in Russia, he's also seen as this really big hero, right? But at the same time, he's hugely nationalistic. He carries a lot of policies against immigrants, people of color. He spoke about these issues that are really not, the kind of liberalism or intellectualism I think we would subscribe to. So there's kind of this interesting mix where Trumpism, some of his ideals, maybe even imagined ideas, are being quite appealing to many people who I think you would not expect for them to be as interested or as pro-Trump. So I don't think it's so much about fascism. Yeah. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Do you think that's because they're opposed to the phenomenon as painted by Trump as the globalists or the liberal internationalism, as Gene likes to call it? The party of Davos, the NATO coalition, the think tanks, the alphabet groups of roundtable groups, et cetera, so on and so forth. Do you find that those intellectuals' appreciation of Trump comes from the fact that he rebukes that kind of liberal, democratic, intellectual, organizational infrastructure that we've had since the end of World War II?
I think that's part of it, but a big part of it is also instrumentalism. So, for example, Chinese intellectuals I spoke to right when Trump got elected, wasn't so much about his big kind of ideas or how he stands in the world. Not to say that he has big ideas, right, but more like how he's kind of against some of the ideas you mentioned. But it's more about how he can stand up to others. So they saw Trump as being the only one who can stand up to President Xi. He's the only one who can say no to China. And these people are pro-democracy in China. So they want anybody who's aggressive vis-a-vis Chinese leaders to be the president of the United States. So they don't care about how he influences America or what he means for the world. They only care about specifically instrumental goals of can he push back on the Chinese Communist Party. And the same thing with Taiwanese activists, Hankanese activists that, many protested against China's takeover of Hong Kong are pro-Trump, right? Explicitly so. So that's not so much, I think, about believing in something bigger. I think it's specifically about what his policies or his particularly very selective discourse, because he didn't actually do that much to push back on China. In many ways, he succumbed to China, right? So he didn't actually do that much to win those battles, but they select a few of his speeches and statements and think that he's actually appealing. So it's a very selective way of kind of thinking about Trump, not very objective.
I would just add to that. This was precisely the discourse that was taking place amongst Kurds when Trump came to power. Many Kurdish people, both elites and also, people on the street, looked at Trump not for anything to do with American domestic policy, but as someone who would be against Iran and who they believed would support Kurdish independence in Iraq, because they were like, well, he doesn't like the Shias and the Islamists, so he's going to back us. Trump ended up screwing those people big time because, again, he's lazy, he has no consistency and no ideological vision. But these people weren't attracted to Trump because Trump was, they were attracted because they believed instrumentally that Trump would do something that Obama had not done before, right? They believed that if there is, I would say, to the extent that it was a critique of the liberal international order, it was more they believed that he would break the kind of existing structures, break out of the existing structures and sort of dynamics, the way that international politics is going on, and do something new and exciting that would benefit them. But it was nothing to do with Trump and his domestic agenda. Because what Americans don't realize is, like, people around the world don't give that much of a crap about the domestic agenda of Donald Trump. They give a crap about how Donald Trump is going to affect their area of the world. There is an egotism around the world where, people in Turkey, when I was working in Turkey, they would think every American congressman and every American political leader is always plotting some policy to do with Turkey, right? So it's egocentric. They don't care. They care about what they believe that he would do. And as Maria said, Trump actually didn't do anything different. He just did a more chaotic version of the long-term American foreign policy, going off the rails a bit. So I would completely concur with Maria. The one point I would make about the fascism thing, I don't find the whole fascism versus no fascism debate particularly helpful in the sense. I think fascism is a political discourse. It's also, can be used as a type of movement. There's a Marxist definition, or there's a Marxian definition of fascism that emerged in response. And I think, I think, the United States is in many ways a pioneer of fascism. So, Americans like to, I think liberal Americans like to pose Trumpism and the fascistic elements of Trumpism as something alienated, something alien, something European that has been imported into the United States, because they refuse to see that the United States and large parts of the United States were, up until living memory, basically apartheid states. They were Rhodesia with slightly different demographics. I think the liberal establishment in America is very keen to use the term fascism because it presents Trump as an alien force in American politics, when in fact he is a type of politics that has existed in America for a long time, that he is a symptom of the nature of the Republican Party and the political direction that it has gone in, and he is not some sui generis individual who is an anomaly in American politics.
In fact, so far from being this weird European mutation that someone like Trump sneaks into American political culture, when the kind of essence of fascism has such deep roots in the United States that when Adolf Hitler, and forgive me, I'm going to bring up the Third Reich, when Adolf Hitler was drafting the Nuremberg race laws, he actually sent teams to study Jim Crow legislation in the South and used that as a model for excluding Jews from public life.
Absolutely. There's a long history of African American intellectuals and radicals who basically said, America has been fascist since inception. The 50-year counter-revolutionary period that I talk about in the post-Nixon era is the anomaly. It's the exception, it's not the norm. So I totally I see where those thoughts come from.
And
Jason, what are your thoughts?
I gave my Trump thoughts earlier this morning. Sorry, I was doing dad shit while you guys were saying big boy stuff.
Nothing more big boy than being a dad.
It's me though.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And he's got a cute kid.
That poor guys. Anyway, enough about children. Trump, for me, I think I agree with pretty much what everybody said. I felt like they got way overblown, mostly because he was uncouth. I had a show a while back last year with one of the economists that come on here, and he said the big thing about Trump is that Trump just says the quiet part out loud. What I think is interesting, we did a show a few days ago about Haiti. And in the Haiti show, we started off with a clip of Joe Biden in 1994 on Charlie Rose. Charlie Rose, probably one of the biggest political shows in America at that time. And on that show, and this is in the middle of the conflict in the Balkans, Joe Biden goes, "Look, man, I'm not really worried about Haiti. It could fucking fall off in the water for all I care." He didn't say fuck, but he literally said it could fall off in the water for all
Haiti could sink 3,000 feet into the ocean. We wouldn't care. Or it could rise up 3,000 feet. We wouldn't care.
He would. And to me, we only heard hearsay of Trump saying shithole countries. We never heard him say it. And this isn't any sort of defense of Donald Trump, but we literally have Joe Biden on record for the last 50 years saying horrible shit, racist shit, imperialist shit, horrible shit. Way worse than Donald Trump. So Trump is gone. I mean, I know people are sad about his fucking Twitter not being there for them to laugh at or whatever. I thought his jokes really weren't that fucking funny. Sound like an old drunk uncle being an asshole. So I won't miss him. I think Joe Biden yelling at black people on a Zoom call about needing to enjoy these interracial commercials is way more offensive than Trump saying the blacks. Because at least Trump hung out with the blacks, right? There's video of him hanging out with Russell Simmons and Mike Tyson and all these other guys. But I don't know,
This has been a fascinating show. I think we have hit all the bases in the corners. Maria, are you bored? You look it's very important that she is pleased with the product here for me, because she made sure she was like, oh, it's all the male energy. So I want to make sure that she is fully participating and is content with her role in our program today.
Oh, don't worry. I'm not scared of all the male energy. It's all good.
You're in DC, the center of male energy, right?
Absolutely, except all the males are sleeping and all the institutions are shut down. So
Did you see what Francis Madsen said? You guys make Charlie Rose sound like a dilettante.
I mean, he's kind of a lightweight.
Well, didn't he get busted for showing his ding-a-ling? Wasn't he like flashing around?
Yeah, he got Me Too'd hard.
Yeah. They took him out.
Yeah.
Well, wasn't he ding-a-ling flashing?
That was Matt Lauer.
Matt Lauer.
Matt Lauer was, I think Charlie Rose was like locking women in his office or something.
That's worse than flashing.
Also Matt Lauer, but I think Charlie Rose like would invite assistants to his beach house, and it's like your job was on the line.
Wasn't he the one though that came out with the robe and nothing else on and was like?
God, that's probably all of them.
I can't keep up with them. It seems like the entire American media establishment, like, it's just so disturbing. But it happens in academia as well, and people have to stay quiet because people's jobs are on the line, right? You can, you can.
Oh, come on. Academia is perfect. What are you talking about?
Oh, okay.
Academia is completely perfect. What do you mean, Gene? What are you talking about?
What do you mean, Gene? You don't wear the robe to class, do you, Gene?
I don't go to
What's going
class
on,
anymore. I'm just on Zoom all the time. I just wear this hat.
On Zoom. Okay, yeah.
I teach on Zoom.
Wasn't there a teacher that caught whacking it on Zoom or something? Or
No, that was Matt Tobin, wasn't it? He got fired for it.
That was a writer.
Yeah, it was a writer.
CNN legal analyst.
Yeah, see,
not an academic. Academics
not
are
an academic.
They're pure. They're correct. They've internalized the proper line.
In academia, we have
proper life.
We have the people who pretend to be black, like that.
Jessica Krug.
Yeah, Jessica Krug, the one who's like, "Hey man, my name's Jessica Krug. I'm a Hispanic. How are you doing?"
I hope she didn't sound like that because I don't know where she'd be from.
She did.
That's how she sounded.
She did.
You got the video. Yes, she sounded like that on the video.
Yes, young man.
She claimed to be Afro-Caribbean.
Afro-Latino and all.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like she might be some sort of mythical sprite.
She was from Kansas City.
Oh my God.
She was from Kansas City, and she was race policing everybody for not being black enough.
Time out.
That's right.
Was she handing out demerits or like red cards like in soccer?
She was like going around calling everyone gentrifiers.
Why?
I don't know. Yeah, but La Bombarina.
Oh yeah, La Bombalera. Right.
So if you're black, you can just go around and start calling people gentrifiers.
Apparently, that's what she thought.
Well,
I don't know. Do you do that in your hood, Pascal? Do you just walk around?
I live in a non-gentrified neighborhood.
Oh, is that code for black?
All right,
Yes.
Pascal.
There you go.
So I don't know if you guys know this. Pascal has been making the rounds on intellectual podcasts because he is the chocolate intellectual fire.
I don't know about all that.
That is his nickname in these streets.
Wow.
I don't know about all that.
Recently, he was on Zero Books with Doug Lane to discuss Matt Taibbi and Matt Taibbi's essay on Marcuse and cancel culture.
And cancel culture, yes.
And I just want to let you guys know a little behind the scenes take. So Pascal didn't really know about Matt Taibbi. He knows Matt Taibbi, but he didn't know about this essay. And so once he got sent the essay, it really pissed him off. And he started sending me messages about how pissed off he was. So I knew at that point, I was like, oh, this is going to be a good show with Doug Lane. Because Pascal is pretty pissed about this Taibbi piece. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, I was a fan of Taibbi's work early on, like in the early aughts. In 2008, he did some good financial reporting about Obama's kind of genuflection to Wall Street. But he's turned into this kind of like, liberal Tucker Carlson on this cancel culture woke nonsense where like he believes that cancel culture is the new hegemonic force. Wokeness is the dominant liberal force in the world that is having poisoning on Western culture. And then he talks about Marcuse as this horrible quack who kind of co-signed on just closing down on freedom of speech. And it was just really like paranoid rant on his part. I'm not a fan of cancel culture or the belief, if anyone's not aware of it, that if you say certain things, your position, your job, or your ability to write should be censored or you should be fired. But at the same time, to make it's a complete elite bourgeois discourse amongst people who are journalists, who are writers, who are worried about their ability to say things that might offend other people without taking the consideration that poor and working class people are canceled all the time. So the whole class politics of it, I find kind of noxious because it's completely a class politics of people who have a certain kind of positionality anyway.
And before I go play this clip of Pascal yelling at Doug Lane for an hour and a half, is there anything, Gene? What are you pushing?
Nothing much at the moment. I just want to thank you for having all us guys on and having such a great conversation. We appreciate it.
Well, of
Thank
course,
you.
I appreciate you, and I, Gene and I and the Lane family are actually playing the Mothership game on Zero Books. We haven't been doing it lately because everybody's got family and life shit, but that actually has been a lot of fun to do role play gaming.
We'll be back.
Leftist role play gaming. Kuba?
Maria, did you enjoy your?
I'm going down the list. You see me going down the line, and you just want to jump right to fine.
Wow, Pascal is so impatient. I enjoyed it very much. It's been great fun. I hope to be invited again.
Yes, we will invite you again.
Cool.
Coobs?
All I'm pushing for is a repeat, an invitation back. But I guess I'll plug the last episode that I was in from like 3 weeks ago. Great stuff, amazing hosts, so handsome. And if you haven't seen it already, right, and you want some more Kuba, highly recommended.
I have to say, I'm sorry. I'm the one that makes the clips, and I've been busy getting all the show shit ready, and I haven't made clips. So tomorrow is my day to clip everything. So hopefully I get some clips of that. I still need to get some clips of Gene on the show that we did about a month or so ago with Dan Larson and Derek Varn, where we watched like some Red Dawn and Breaking 2 Electric Boogaloo. So that's what you have to look forward to, Maria. A lot of U.S. pop culture references.
I'm a little behind on that, but I got other stuff.
Oh, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. We will immerse you in horrible U.S. pop culture if you're down. So I want to end with my homie, my dog on Zero Books. He was also on Ben Burgess's show as well.
Thanks for the
with
promo.
Emma Vigeland. So again, he's everywhere. He's writing a book right now. What's it called?
The Reckoning, from Obama to Trump and the Crisis of Black Politics.
All right. I love it.
See? You're killing it.
Absolutely.
Your life is dope and you do dope shit. Don't you ever forget it. Don't you fucking ever forget it. You put that, everybody here, you put that on a fucking bumper sticker.
My whole shtick is to pretend to be more intellectual than I actually am. So you're shaming me a little bit by putting that preface there.
I forgot Doug has this long ass weird
is about
ass
the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Zero Squared is the Zero Books podcast. What I hope to do with this conversation is just sort of discuss the issues in Matt Taibbi's recent essay and the issues in Marcuse's essay on tolerance as best we can. Yeah,
I think that I'm qualified to do that.
Yeah, and and there are certainly people out there who will correct us if we make mistakes about the philosophy or whatever, and I welcome that. So. Yeah, to begin with, I guess what I want to say is that I find myself often enough in Camp Taibbi.
Really?
Yeah, but not in this particular case. But overall, I think Taibbi has his head screwed on right, and that his detractors on the left often are way off base. That isn't to say that I consider Taibbi to be a great socialist or a leader for the left.
I don't think Taibbi is actually a left figure at all. I think he's basically a liberal.
Right, exactly, and I agree with that. So, nonetheless, I would say that a consistent liberal is often much better and more useful than most of the left. these days?
I would correct that to say a consistent liberal to today's contemporary left.
Yeah,
I think there might be some truth to that, perhaps. That's a very